we're stepping into the space of analysis now, and I'm just going to give you a bit of a picture as to where quantitative research actually sits when it comes to analysis. Ultimately, at the very top of our pyramid of the great styles of research you can get, you have the experiment. When you actually literally have a lab and you introduce something into that lab and you look at what's actually happening. Really good example of this is the Bobo the Doll experiment, which I think I talked about beforehand. So to understand experiments, we have to go all the way down into this bottom bit here about variables. Now in quantitative research, there are three types of variables. The dependent, the independent, and the extraneous variable. And what researchers love about experiments is that you can get rid of the extraneous variable. The extraneous variable means extra variable. So a big word meaning extra. The extra variables. So I do not know, I could do a lot of research on the effect of Georgie pies on our health, and I could come to the conclusion that Georgie pie is really bad on our health. Well, there's easy word correlation, but the thing that I could come to the conclusion about the people who eat the most Georgie pies are more likely to have a heart attack. Now, if I've done this just as a research looking at people eating Georgie pies, what I've forgotten to take into account are the extra variables. The extra variables. It might not actually be the Georgie pie that is causing the person to have heart attacks and die. It could actually be the Coca-Cola that they're having with the Georgie pie and the 6 McDonald's hamburgers that they're having with it as well. The extra variables there were 6 McDonald's hamburgers and a Coca-Cola. And often when we're doing research, particularly when it comes to drugs and health, it's really important to look at the extraneous variables. What have they actually noted could also be influencing something? In an experiment, you can get rid of the extraneous variables. So in one room, a person will live on Georgie pie alone. In another room, a person will have a normal diet. And I'll be able to compare the two groups. And I'll be able to go, definitely, no extraneous variable here. And then us qualitative researchers go in and say, well, that's an extraneous variable because you don't live in labs in real life. But the extraneous variable is the extra variables. Another definition of it is the other reasons, the other possible reasons for something happening. So the two variables that the researchers are actually watching the whole time are the dependent and the independent variable. The way to think about these is the dependent variable is dependent on the independent variable. So the dependent variable is dependent on the independent variable. One of those variables is going to change. That could be, just trying to think how to do this really easy. Behaviour. My behaviour is dependent on this independent variable. This is a piece of research that's done, the Bobo the Doll experiment. 2 rooms. In one room, the kids are left, little babies, toddlers, left with a pile of toys just to play with. The dependent variable is their behaviour. The independent variable has not been introduced. In the other room, we're still watching the children's behaviour, but we've added something different. We've added a TV show. And on that TV show, they see a picture of a doll being bashed by a child. So the children, their dependent variable being their behaviour, that dependent variable depending upon what the independent variable is, they can say with the introduction of a TV and a violent program, we can change the behaviour of children.
Does it also change if the researcher's in the room with them as well?
That would be an extraneous variable. So we have rooms here that have been set up for research, but they've been set up for assessment, but you could do research in the rooms here. The counselling room's just around the corner, just along the side there. One of the rooms has glass that you can see through, the other room doesn't. That would be a typical laboratory for educational researchers. When I was at Vic, we had whole classrooms with glass walls. One wall I could see completely into the other classroom. The other one, it actually looked like a wall. It didn't actually look like a window or mirror. So people in that room didn't actually know that we were watching them at all. So that's how the researcher stops themselves becoming an extraneous variable
So,
in an experiment.
okay, so if we did that, say if we did that with adults, let's say gave one some type of drug, is the drug independent or is it extraneous?
If you put the introduction,
In terms of behaviour or something.
well,
maybe.
drugs and behaviour, the drug is the independent variable, the behaviour dependent on the drug.
Yeah.
So looking at stuff like the treatment of depression, that's what they would have been looking at. So the difference between MAOs, inhibitors, SSRIs, and tricyclics. They would say that the independent variable was the drug, the dependent variable was the person's mood. How does that mood change with those three drugs? Most of the research will say that the SSRIs tend to have better performance. But the research will also confirm for some people the other two classes will have an effect as well. So that's how they'll do it. The independent variable is the drug, the dependent variable is the mood. How does the drug influence the mood?
Yep. Sorry, just going back to the cloud experiment. So the dependent V word is behaviour. Then what's the independent?
The introduction of a violent TV show. Whereas in the other room, the violent TV show wasn't introduced.
Changes the behaviour.
The other room's called the control group because they are going to be the one that's compared against the group that's having the experiment done on them. We've already talked about this quite a lot, but if you're doing the positivist, post-positivist stuff, you're going to see numbers mentioned all the time and empirical stuff, things that can be counted, things that can be seen. That's what these researchers are interested in. We've already talked about sampling, but key words for quantitative research that are really, really important are reliability and validity. And when you're reading your articles, you're not reading as an expert knowing what reliability and validity are. You're reading to see whether they know what they are. If they know what they are from the simple definition I give you, then you're right. You don't have to worry about them saying, like this book here will do, which I'll show you a bit later on, but this book here gives me reliability and validity measures for every single test in the book. Now, I will be honest, I do not know these measures. I know that I'll give them, like I said last week, to a statistician, and they will tell me the measures. They are the experts. But I depend on seeing those measures in here just because then it says it ticks the box. So, reliability is I can be certain that the information that I found is reliable enough that if I repeat it somewhere else, I'll get the same information. So if I was to ask a question like, and this is an unreliable question, very good unreliable question here. What gender do you identify with? 2 tick boxes, male and female. Okay, if I was just to ask that question and I went into a classroom in a high school, I can be guaranteed that that question is not reliable because there are some people who do not identify as male or female. It's an unreliable question, so I don't know what I'm going to get whenever I use it. The answers will be very, very different. If I was to go into a school and say, into a classroom and say, what is your favourite, out of the following, what are your favourite breakfast cereals? Cocoa Pops, Cubics, Corn Rumbles, and Vegemite. Only one of those products
We know.
you know. The rest you don't. So you don't know what's going to be ticked all the time. It's unreliable again. So reliable piece of information is when the question's asked, no matter where it's asked, the likelihood of getting the same response is going to be the same. Okay? Validity refers to how sound your information is. So internal validity means that everything that you're using within your study is going to give you consistent results, not the same results, consistent results. That you have actually accounted for all your extraneous variables. Even mentioning them counts. And external validity means that the research can be generalised out. This is quantitative people. They want to know that they can generalise out. So you want to have reliable and valid studies. Now here's another key word for you, significance. So you're going to be encountering, particularly in evidence-based practice, a lot of statistical journal articles. You will be like me and unable to read all the stats. I might be just half a step ahead of you in some of the stats that I can read. You don't need to worry too much about the numbers. You need to worry about that word significance. What that word significance means, if you see a pile of numbers and they say there was a significant difference between young people who ate Cocoa Pops and young people who ate cornflakes, you know that the stats that are in front of you are actually indicating, like we talked about last year, that the hypothesis is more powerful than the null hypothesis. If you are reading a qualitative study and they've used significance in it, and say the relationship between Cocoa Pops, stories of eating Cocoa Pops and stories of eating Frosty Flakes are significantly different, and you've read that in a qualitative study, you can go, I can't see any numbers. This research is using the wrong language. Now, where I've seen this word being misused is in reports that have come over my desk at Global Focus when I used to help NGOs do their own evaluations of the youth development services, and they'd go, our service had a significant difference for our clients, and they'd only have 10 clients, and I'd go, no, this isn't quantitative. So if you don't know how to use that word, or if you're using F7 all the time on words like important, do not replace with significant or significance. Okay, that's no-go zone. That's for the territory of quantitative research only. And when you see it in quantitative, if it says that there's a significant relationship between two things, you know then that the stats are telling you a story. If it says there's not a significant relationship, then you know that the stats are telling you a story that there's no significant relationship. Don't have to worry too much about the graphs. In fact, you can miss out the graphs and charts altogether. Just read this. Read for that word significant. The next step up is learning to read those graphs and learning to read those tables. Eliminating bias. If a researcher is not using an experiment or a quasi-experiment, which is a pretend experiment, so the reality is most researchers in the health sciences will be quasi-experiments because we can't set up labs. So I might have one school and another school. They're like my mini laboratories, but they're not real experimental settings. So that's why we had that word quasi. Quasi means pretend. Okay, so if you're wanting to serve your kids fruit tonight for dessert, call it a quasi-dessert. We're having quasi-dessert tonight. Where's the sugar? No, it's a pretend dessert. Okay, so quasi meaning pretend. So I take a situation that I try to make as experimental as possible, and in that situation I try to eliminate as much bias as possible, and that's through sampling and trying to remove myself as much as possible from that situation. So in the case that you brought up, Rose, in this setting, in a quantitative setting, the researcher wants to be outside that fishbowl. They don't want to be in it. Okay, any questions on this?
Don't change it. Sorry. Yeah.
So I'll just go through some of the techniques that we do use in quantitative research to get our data. Our techniques in quantitative research are a lot easier than the qualitative techniques. The first thing we use is testing. And we talked about this last week. And I forgot the term that you use in counselling. Someone raised it last week. You'll remember it when it comes up. Testing is not a survey. It is literally taking someone else's tool and repeating it to gather data. That's what testing is.
And adding more? Or
No,
just as it is?
as it is. So, and this for me, this is gold, this book. You're not going to believe how much this book costs. I paid $600 for this, and it's paper covered. It's one of my students in the BYD went away, got the book for like $3 off Amazon. Not Amazon, off eBay. Yeah, the second-hand one. I was like, oh, why did I have to buy it new? Why it costs so much is I paid for the rights to use all the tests in the book. So this book, what I also love about it is it says strengths-based. So it's not like deficit-based things to find out why people are not healthy. So it's got heaps of different things in it. Like it's got tests on hope, optimism, and humour. Tests on aspirations, goals, and values. Tests on families. Tests on children and adolescents. Health, wellness, and health-related quality of life. At the beginning of it, it gives me all this stuff. I literally cannot read these things about reliability and validity, but I see that they've got lots of numbers, and I see that the words around them tell me it's reliable and valid. So I'm like, yep, sweet. Okay, so I know that this is going to give me the information that I need from that page. It also tells me how to use it completely. And then it tells me how it's all structured. Oh, that might be it. Oh yeah, so then it gives me the questions. Perceived health competence scale. 1 being strongly agreed, 5 being strongly disagreed. I handle myself well with respect to my health. So the person puts something in there. No matter how hard I try, my health just doesn't turn out the way I would like. It's difficult for me to find effective solutions. It's only got like 8 questions. Then I look on the page here to find out how I'm actually meant to analyse those questions. All the instructions are there for me, so I can follow that rather than trying to dream up what I'm meant to do. So on this, I add the items together, and but for the items 2, I add so if that's given me a 1 here, I add that together, but it's asked me to reverse add for other items, which means if they've given me a 1, I add a 5 instead of a 1. So sometimes researchers, in order to make sure that you're not just ticking the same box on a questionnaire, they swap the questions around. So they might have a question saying, I love my dog, and they might then later on have a question saying, I dislike my dog. So I will know whether the person's actually answering correctly if they go click 1, I love my dog, strongly agree, and then they get to 5 and they hit 5, I dislike my dog. So I'll count 1 for that one instead of 5 for that one. So that's what reverse counting is. So reverse count it. So I would have, and then it gives me, it says total scores range from 8 to 40 with higher scores reflecting higher perceived health confidence. And what I tend to do with tests and what researchers tend to do with tests is a before and after. So now you've just entered into our service, we're doing this research project, would you like to be a part of it? This is what's going to happen, they sign this consent form, blah, 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 blah. They fill it out at the beginning, and then 6 weeks down the track they might fill it out again, another 6 weeks down the track they might fill it out again, and then I can make a nice little line graph just about how their health competency has changed over the time. And it's also got very long questionnaires. Cancer behaviour inventory, a brief version. Oh, there's a brief version there of cancer. Domestic violence, self-coping. Couples, that's a nice long one. Relationship rating form. Okay, so I find with young people, the shorter is often the better. So I probably wouldn't use the relationship one with them. But I also find that you're not allowed to do certain things with tests, but I also find that I don't always want to give people paper ones, so I might actually put one up on SurveyMonkey, which is an online survey tool, or I might turn one into an activity where you walk to that side of the room for 5 and you walk to the side of the room for 1. So it's not involving the pen and paper all the time.
And so that means that rather than trying to create the tests ourselves, we've got a standardised set, easy access, we just ask people the same questions, and maybe every researcher is doing something a little bit similar.
Every researcher will be asking the same questions if it was on one big project. Yeah. But what you also know is if you went to publish something, you could say this is a test you used, and then any other publication that's any other piece of research that's used the same test, you'll be able to compare your research with, and that tells you how reliable your study is overall, because you've got similar results in two different situations.
What if you apply that test to a specific ethnic group that the other people have applied the same test to generalised?
That's one of those critical questions again. So with testing, it's imperative that you use the same test exactly how it is. You can't even change the scale. So if the scales are 1 to 5, you can't change it to a 1 to 4, because then you muck up the reliability of the whole test. The issue that arises out of that is that while all tests are equal, some tests are more equal than others. And this is seen in IQ testing. So IQ testing has been seen as the benchmark of all testing. There's set IQ tests, but what they have found is that the questions in IQ tests are predominantly weighted towards white American male youth. Even to the point that some of the original tests actually had pictures of equipment that was never ever used in an out of white American male youth context. Like a pull cart or something, you know, those toys. There was like a little wheelbarrow but on 4 wheels that they used to drag along behind. Not all cultures and kids have that. So there is an inherent problem with tests on that. That's why it's quite important to see what the reliability and validity is, and then do a literature review to see how it's been used elsewhere.
Dr. Phillip, what's that book like? As in what countries does it do the tests in?
It's predominantly US. And inherently then it has the problems of being predominantly US.
Yeah, and so, like when did the first test begin? That they were published?
They keep testing the reliability and validity over and over again.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So, and you'll see that some of them will talk about how they've done this internationally.
Okay.
Yeah. It's like, put it this way, if you're going to use tests, you have to go down this path. You can't create your own test unless you're prepared to do this massive pilot and do all the stuff they've done in the States. So if you're going to use tests, you might as well use an established one. You don't have to use tests though. It's just that they're really, really useful for quick numbers.
Do we have New Zealand-based books like that?
No. The closest thing that we would have for young people is the Health Resource Manual from Christchurch, the collaborative, but that's all based on the HEADS assessment, and the HEADS assessment's not quite a test because it gets more qualitative data out of it. The only test that I know of that's been really developed on an international scale is Save the Children's Child Resiliency test. I don't think we've got the numbers of population, and this is what the big scientists would argue. We don't have the population in New Zealand to actually create a test, even though we would want to do it just for New Zealand.
And you can't even tweak them.
Not me too. Yeah, I was involved in a research project looking at attitudes towards climate change up at Vic, and they were using a standard test, and it had a 5-point Likert, and the people that they based a literature review on had changed that 5-point Likert into a 4-point Likert, and the instant reaction to that was that our statistician came back and said your results are completely unreliable, you cannot compare your research to them. There's a big difference. So I like it being those scales of 1 you really like it, 2 you don't really, I don't really like it. There's a big difference between a 4-point and a 5-point. A 4-point there is no seat to sit on or no fence to sit on. A 5-point there is a neutral point all the time. So as soon as you take a neutral out, you actually force people to go on either side. So that has a huge impact. And then the other big difference is when you've got 10 points. I absolutely hate 10-point scales. I prefer to work within the 4 and 5 points. And I prefer, if I'm creating a questionnaire, which I can create, I prefer to use a 5-pointer because I believe that everyone has a right to sit on a fence. Me as a researcher, I don't want them on a fence, but if they want to sit on a fence, I need to give them that choice. So when the like-it got changed and we ran it up at Vic, the amount of academics who were researching academics' attitudes to climate change, who literally, they ignored the whole test and they got down to the bottom and they just went on a tirade against the research project. How dare you? Because they had felt that we were forcing them to be either pro or anti-climate change.
These like, oh sorry. The like it tests I have used it once in an evaluation.
Yeah.
So they're all right there. I found them okay there, but that's not really test. That's only evaluating what I've done. So.
I know that even feedback from students in our school to the evaluation surveys that Welltech has, because I think they only have a 4-point like it or something, and we've had feedback from you as students saying, actually, this isn't allowing us to say what we really want to say.
Unless you put something, add comments.
Add comments, yeah.
So, yeah.
What that means by test for significance, so that important word to see if something is significant, they can occur, and what you'll see written often, these are the two big ones, is ANOVA and chi-square, or chi-square. Those are the two big tests that get used all the time in stats. So when you're reading your paragraph explaining it, and you see this word chi-square, one of you had that, they showed it to me last week, and every sentence had chi-square written in it. All you're looking for is the word significance or significant. There is a significant relationship. What that means is that there's one variable, that dependent variable, and we've found when you introduce that independent variable, things start changing for the dependent variable. There's a significant relationship between going to the gym and perceived well-being. Perceived well-being. The more a person goes to the gym, the more likely, and this is the way they will talk, the more likely they are to feel better. Now they will say more likely, or correlation is the other one they will use. All of this means that there looks like there's a relationship there, but we can't say there's a cause there. We can't say going to the gym causes you to feel better because of all those extraneous variables that we can never see. One of those biggest extraneous variables is we're dealing with humans. So what the tests are used for are psychometric variables, that's your health and wellbeing stuff, all your health and wellbeing stuff is used for, and educational stuff. You don't seem to see tests used outside of those contexts. Then you get to surveys. Now the difference between a survey in a quantitative sense, a test in a quantitative sense, is you make the survey. You make the survey. They are also called questionnaires. Now, in survey research, when you're using questionnaires, there are two main types. There is a cross-sectional survey and a longitudinal survey. A cross-sectional survey is when I've got my sample and it's a piece in time, it's a section in time, and I survey that sample at that point in time. So it's taking a section of a sample at a point in time and surveying that sample at a point in time. So in youth research, we have a famous study called, census counts as this, but Youth 2000, it started in the year 2000 by the adolescent research unit up in Auckland. They researched about 5,000 young people in New Zealand. That's a pretty good sample size. We know that their research is limited to young people only in school, so we don't know about young people who were either homeless and not in school or not in school at all. But it gives us a picture of their well-being for the year 2000. In the year 2004, the same survey was done. Another group of young people across New Zealand. No doubt some of the same group of the young people beforehand answered it, but there's no way that we know. Each one is its own separate little survey. The latest one was done in 2010. So that's an example of a cross-sectional survey. A longitudinal survey, the key word there is long. And that is when you return to that person and you know who they are. I'll give them a number. So I might give T the number 1, Jess the number 2, Richard the number 3. The first time I survey them, then 4 years later I go and survey them, they've still got the same numbers. So I can actually look at the changes that are happening for them. So longitudinal over a period of time. That is your Dunedin study. It's a longitudinal piece of research.
Can I please talk to you outside for a couple of minutes? Hey guys, sorry, I'm disrupting everything, sorry.
Have a talk.
I don't know whether it's me, but I'm just like.
Oh, it's on TV. Why Am I is what it's called.
What TV was showing?
Yeah. It's called Why Am I?
Yeah. Well, it's kind of seems a little bit like trial and error,
Yeah.
you know, and repetitive. Keep on trying. Hey, Dr. Fee, you know, if you do a research through
Oh,
where was it?